Hello and welcome to Addis Matters, our show on Ethiopian current affairs with me, Benyas Meso. The appointed time to start filling the Grand Renaissance Dam, in spite of heavy resistance and criticism from lower basin countries, Egypt and the Sudan, Ethiopia is unilaterally pushing its plan. What will be the consequence of these actions? As some have been saying for years, are these countries really heading to conflict? I have two guests, experts in the subject matter, to analyze the issue. William Davison, Senior Ethiopian Analyst at the Crisis Group and founding editor of Ethiopia Insight. Fekahmed Negash, Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office Executive Director. Welcome to the show and thank you for your time, views and insights. February 2020 was the last time the three countries met face-to-face in Washington, D.C. Ethiopia opted out of the final deal mediated and endorsed by the United States government and the World Bank Group. Since then, in the middle of the corona pandemic, restricted international movement with stay-at-home orders of lockdown procedures in many parts of the world, the diplomatic battle was going on underground. Egyptian diplomats were busy crisscrossing the globe in the hope of getting international support to their cause. Eventually, Egypt escalated the situation by reporting to the UN Security Council. Ethiopia didn't lose ground, gave a strong response, cementing its right to its own resources. The international community gave a mixed response. The United States, the World Bank Group, and Arab League seemed to stand behind Egypt. The European Union, the German government, and prominent individuals like the Black American civil rights activist Reverend J.C. Jackson openly defended Ethiopia's rights to use and develop its resources. The UN Secretary General referred the three countries back to the Declaration of Principles they signed in 2015. Months of talk collapsed. The three countries get back to virtual discussion in June 2020. With Sudan playing the mediator role now. William, if I may, let me start with you. Correct me if I missed any important landmark in the last 4 or 5 months, but what should we expect now? Will there be any change?
So the shuttle diplomacy acting between Egypt and Ethiopia to get those talks reconvened, they have now broken up without an agreement. And so there does seem to have been some movement on some key obstacles, particularly this issue of how to manage any future drought. There's some convergence between Sudan and Ethiopia there. But there are major outstanding issues on drought mitigation, to my understanding, still between Egypt and Ethiopia. And there is also a raft of legal issues that are unresolved. The issue of how to resolve future disputes, the legal status of the agreement, Ethiopia's rights or otherwise, or what constraints there will be on Ethiopia's right to build future upstream projects. So although there was some progress, the talks have broken up. Filling, as you correctly say, is rapidly approaching. I mean, I think what needs to happen is that the talks need to reconvene, and they just need to keep sitting around the table and trying to thrash out these remaining issues. But also, as you noted, there is another element to this dispute with the UN SC process. There's also the danger, quite frankly, of the US government trying to intervene again and influence. We saw this very unwise tweet from the National Security Council. So there is a danger that we focus more on this kind of diplomatic escalation rather than continued negotiations. Now, exactly where that's leading is very hard to say. It's hard to say what Egypt's sort of actual end game is here. So we've seen some progress in negotiations, but major issues outstanding and quite a lot of concern about this diplomatic and political escalation of the issue.
Fekahmed, it's almost we are heading to a deadlock. Do we know any detail about it?
Yeah, I mean, the countries are reporting that they reached, a good understanding, actually, technically, in all its forms. What I mean is that there is understanding on the feeling. There is also understanding on drought mitigation. And also, they say they reached understanding on annual operation of the dam. Now, the critical parties are really to convert this technical understanding into legal agreements. So that's actually the challenging part, because there are some sensitive issues. While trying to actually change the technical part into the legal form, there are some sensitive issues that are really very much related to the colonial era agreements. There are sensitive issues that may imply water sharing. There are also sensitive issues that can put one of the countries into responsibility for the overall, for whatever is happening in the future. So it is very critical, and really they have to work very hard. And it is very, like looking at the time left now with the planned feeling, it is really a very critical time now.
The details are not coming out, but they said there is an understanding on technical issues. What do they mean by that? Does it include the drought mitigation plans, or is it rather about the filling of the water and the annual operations?
Yeah, I mean, it is in all. Okay. It is in all. They discussed on the filling plan, and one of the critical parties, for example, how much water will be released for downstream, for the downstream use, which actually they changed it now to environmental flow. Because if it is a release for downstream utilization, it is going to be it has implication of water sharing. So they called it environmental flow. Environmental flow means a flow for all purposes, for ecosystem, for downstream use, or for whatever it is. So I don't know the detail, but they say they really reached to an understanding, but I don't have the figures actually of environmental flow. Drought mitigation, it used to be like in the Washington drafted document. Drought mitigation was totally and squarely the responsibility of Ethiopia. But now, I mean, the discussion was how they can jointly take responsibility for drought mitigation, because drought mitigation is for everybody. And also the way drought was defined in the Washington text was not correct, because it was defined based upon release from the dam, not based upon the inflow into the dam, but the drought should be defined in terms of inflow into the dam. So I think they also discussed on this, but I don't have the final agreement. Also, there was a discussion on annual operation. I think annual operation will not be a very big issue. Yeah.
Thank you. William, let me get back to you. You've started on the roles of the United States government, tried to play. There are additional foreign players now in the virtual discussion that has been opened. The new observers include, in addition to the USA and the World Bank, the European Union, the South African government, and the African Union are also taking part as observers. At least the chairman of African Union has said to be taken part as an observer in one of the meetings. But the two parties, Ethiopia and Egypt, are on totally different grounds. Egypt wants to continue the talk from where they left in Washington. Ethiopia seems to regret to get into the talk in the first place in Washington and wants to limit the negotiation to GERD only. What role can the new observers play to bring the parties closer?
Well, I think the nature of their observer status, and I think that's probably been sort of more strictly codified than in the Washington process because of the problems that evolved there with observers overstepping their role, at least in the eyes of Ethiopia. So I think they are, there was an initial discussion about defining the role of the observer, so not too much. But of course, there's the opportunity for, clearly they're fully informed about the negotiations, opportunities for behind-the-scenes diplomacy in terms of delivering messages. There is, I can't remember the exact wording, but there is a sort of, the parties may ask the observers for advice, I believe, presumably if there's a consensus between the parties. So there would be an opportunity for a more formal intervention there. And then more generally speaking, because this process has been going on for so long, whilst it has to be a trilateral matter and a matter of national sovereignty in terms of responsibility for resolving this issue, I think there is a need, quite frankly, for all partners of the various parties to be trying to play a positive role. And in my view, in the crisis group view, that's about people making the necessary concessions to try and get an agreement over the line. If I could just perhaps rewind to the technical issues. But I think if we have this, there's a distinction being made between technical issues and legal issues. Now, on the technical issues, I was actually just reading Egypt's statement. So they still have reservations about the technical aspect of drought mitigation. And the way that I'm seeing that is that in February, Ethiopia rejected a multi-year drought mitigation scheme. And this is the territory that moves into what Fekahmed was referring to, water allocation, water sharing, something more appropriate for a basin-wide agreement. Now, Sudan and Ethiopia have made proposals about how to manage a multi-year drought, but without entering into a multi-year drought mitigation scheme. So we avoid the concept of accounting and water debt and Ethiopia owing water, which Ethiopia is so against in principle. And instead it's a matter of getting the numbers right for the types of minimum releases that Ethiopia is willing to make and how much water it's willing to release from storage. And then if it comes to a multi-year drought, there will be a coordination mechanism. The parties will get together and they'll decide how the various dams, Aswan and the Sudanese dams, how they can also help mitigate drought. But then the issue is about how much of that is agreed in advance. Ethiopia wants something fairly dynamic and cooperative. Egypt wants everything written down for years in advance. Ethiopia understandably objects to this. They don't want their future to be mortgaged to an agreement that they make. And then there is significant climate change, there is upstream development, there are downstream alterations, and the circumstances have changed. So Ethiopia wants flexibility. And it's my understanding that this issue of flexibility and the dynamism of the agreement, the ability to revise the terms as this natural circumstances change, that's when we start to move into the legal debate, right? Because Egypt wants this to be detailed and absolutely legally binding all aspects forever. Ethiopia is saying, we're happy to negotiate on these issues, but ultimately we want to have some opportunity to renegotiate in the future. And it's my understanding that this is when the technical issues and these legal issues, and it's the legal issues which have been the focus in terms of disagreement, but I believe that there's an important linkage there.
Absolutely. I think, my view is also the same. Even if they say they have agreed on technical terms, the major issue will be the legal matter, isn't it? It will be binding. Sure. So my guess is, again, we've seen it for the last 9 years. When they get to the legal point, the talk could collapse once again.
Yeah, and I think, saying that, you agree on 90 or 95% of an issue, that might be good, but then it's kind of important what the 5% is, right?
Yeah.
And that might, and it is actually likely to be, obviously, the hardest thing to agree on. And I think, this issue of how to deal with multi-year drought on the technical side, I'm not sure, but I think there's a danger that the hardest element is the outstanding element.
Fekahmed, a reference has been made to go back to the 2015 Declaration of Principles once again, even by the UN Secretary General. What is in that agreement? What's in the Declaration of Principles that's so important that a reference is made once again?
Yeah, when we look at the 2015 agreement that was signed actually between the three countries by the head of states, actually, it's the Declaration of Principles. It is a series of about 10 principles which are believed really to guide the feeling and annual operation of the GERD. 3 of the principles may come out as very critical. The first is the equitable and the reasonability, principle of equitable and the reasonable utilization during the filling of the GERD. The second is an obligation not to cause significant harm. And the third one is actually deals with agreement on the guideline for filling and annual operation. This part actually covers a lot of issues. It talks about undertaking the two studies recommended by the International Panel of Experts faithfully in parallel with the construction of the dam. This is very important. They say they will do the studies in parallel with the construction of the dam. Second, they say based upon the outcome of the studies, they will agree on guideline for filling and annual operation. And also they put a time limit of 15 months to finalize the preparation of the studies as well as the preparation of the guideline for filling and operation. So that was in 2015. And the idea behind the 15 months was actually, at that time, Ethiopia's plan was to start filling in July 2016. So the agreement was made in March 2015. This is very important, by the way. So the study was planned to be conducted for 11 months. That is April to March 2016. So they told us the study will be finalized by March 2016. Then they will do 3 months of negotiation, that is April, May, June, to negotiate and come up with the guideline and then make an agreement. Then Ethiopia will start filling in July 2016. This was actually what it talks about. But later on, there came a misunderstanding, or there is a difference in interpretation of this article now, today, because Egypt is, as well as now even Sudan starts saying, at that time, so it was not Sudan's intention, but now Egypt is saying Ethiopia will fill only when we reach agreement on the guideline. But during that time, I'm aware of what was going on. Actually, Egypt requested this specifically, clearly, that Ethiopia will not fill the dam until agreement is reached, and this is rejected by Ethiopia and Sudan, actually. So what they did is that they put that up front, the studies will be conducted in parallel with the construction of the dam. And the construction of the dam normally includes the civil work, the electromechanical, the hydromechanical, the filling, as well as generation of energy. This is what is known as actually the construction of the dam. So the agreement was that this will go in parallel, and they will rush up to finish it before Ethiopia starts filling. Later on, there was actually a difference in the interpretation of this article, which is Article 5. Yeah.
William, it seems like the international support coming from other sources, namely the European Union and prominent figures like J.C. Jackson, must have emboldened the Ethiopian team. The German government's proposal was a very interesting one in my view, a compensation scheme whereby Egypt financially compensates Ethiopia for slow filling of the dam and adjacent economic opportunities missed as a result of that. In short, the financial value of the electricity Ethiopia was not able to generate and its corresponding economic benefits. Reverend J.C. Jackson added, urging the Congress Black Caucus to pass a strong bill against Egypt. What's the Ethiopian doctrine in this? Do you think such international supports might have contributed to Ethiopia's very strong approach this time around?
Are you referring to this German think tank, the SWP report?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's German government policy necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, my understanding is a certain amount of interest in the idea from the German government and the broader European Union as well. I mean, I think, the Ethiopian approach to this dam is not one which relies on external actors to support them in the venture. I mean, that's against the very principle of the project. It's a demonstration of Ethiopian self-reliance, ability to fund its own development, an assertion of its historically denied rights over the Nile. So I wouldn't see it as integral to the Ethiopian positioning. because the Ethiopian positioning stems from the Ethiopian attitude towards the Nile and the dam. Now, there is a propaganda war going on, and in a propaganda war, the more people on your side, the better, especially if they have a certain amount of standing, as the Reverend does, as a famous civil rights activist. Doesn't do any harm, but I think the Ethiopian position is a homegrown position. So.
Fekahmed, the negotiation team has been strengthened by probably popular view of the public about the dam and the opportunity that Egypt was about to had in February, and the pressure that was coming from the United States must have united Ethiopians one way or another. Tell us a bit about the new negotiating team. There seems to be some changes that we are hearing.
Yeah, the information from what we can see that there is a change on the Ethiopian negotiating team, particularly on the diplomatic part and the legal part. It is highly strengthened, and there are new people with a very long experience of negotiation, and also some people who are very powerful in the political structure of the country. So this is mainly, I think, made to really balance the composition of the negotiation team vis-a-vis other countries, particularly Egypt. So it is relatively stronger now. And also I would like to add on what William was saying, that Ethiopia's position as well as interest from the start is still the same. So it is accommodating, but at the same time protecting its own national interest. So there are pressures, also there are supports. They can have both positive as well as negative impact on the ongoing negotiation, but it doesn't change the underlying position as well as interest of the country. So that's actually existing, and I am sure will continue in the future.
William, you mentioned the propaganda war on both sides, in Ethiopia in particular.
Which of course I'm involved in, haven't I?
Yeah, in Ethiopia in particular, in the last few weeks, there was a strong sentiment coming out of the government media outlets, and actually there is an interview given by the Deputy Chief of Army, General Brahanu Jula. He gave a lengthy interview to the Amharic daily newspaper, Addis Matter, and he basically said, paraphrased, if Egypt doesn't behave properly, Ethiopia can actually take the whole thing. He also added...
To take the whole river?
Yeah. We can say it's almost 100% the resources ours, and we can make use of 100% usage. He also said it's unthinkable for Egyptian soldiers to set foot in Ethiopia and on the banks of the river to guard the flow of the river. Isn't he right? Or is it just a military bluff?
Right about which aspect? All of it.
All of it.
I think that yes, it is part of this process. Unfortunately, that as well as these technical negotiations, people like Fekahmed, trying to deal with the issues in a essentially in a sort of scientific manner. There's also a huge political dimension to this, of course, and a great deal of public support as well, public passion on the issue. And the Nile, obviously for Egypt, they consider it a matter of national security and vital national interest. And of course, Ethiopia has corresponding claims and concerns. It's a matter of vital importance to develop their own resources. That's what leads into this involvement of the military actors, of security actors. Of course, we've seen belligerent statements. Remember during the brief rule of President Morsi, for example, there has been numerous allegations of destabilization, proxy activity, and this type of rhetoric. That's what leads to General Brahanu's interview and his comment. And I think at the core, it's simply saying we are willing to protect this project because it's a matter of vital national interest. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to talk about, completely blocking the Blue Nile River for any sustained period of time. That would have severe negative downstream shortages. I don't think that would be in anybody's interests in the long term.
Fekahmed, you are also against the securitization of the Nile. But both Egypt and the Sudan has brought the issue to the UN Security Council, and it seems like, beyond diplomacy, beyond negotiation, there are other things being contemplated on both sides of the government, both Ethiopia and Egypt.
Yeah, by the way, it is not new. Like from the start, Egypt was, working very hard to take the issue of the Nile from technical, which is actually the Nile. The water issue is purely a technical issue that can be resolved through the technical ministries, that is the ministers in charge of water affairs. But Egypt was working first to take the issue to the political level, that is by bringing the ministers of foreign affairs. And they worked very hard to bring in the security people, like the head of the security were part of the 9-party meeting, even in the GERD. So the idea behind actually overall Egypt's strategy is to internationalize the issue of the GERD, to securitize it, take it to the security level, convince the international community that this is a regional security crisis, and then to take it to the Security Council, in belief that the Security Council will back them. And it worked for them to some extent because the ministers of foreign affairs started being involved, and the security people also, head of security of the three countries.
And also the White House Security Council is involved now?
Yeah, then they took it to the Security Council. But normally, water is not a security issue.
Isn't it?
Water, yes, it is not a security issue. Water is actually an issue that countries can cooperatively. It is an issue for cooperation rather. Several historical precedences show that countries can misunderstand, can go into tension, but go back to cooperation. They say in transboundary water, like conflict and cooperation coexist. This is what's happening. But you take it to the security level.
But it depends on the parties involved.
Definitely everybody has to be genuinely cooperative. There should be genuine cooperation. There should be clear understanding of each other's interests. There should be clear understanding of each other's concerns and fears. If that happens, they will go back to cooperation. Even if that is not happening, countries will definitely come back to cooperation. Look at what is happening between Pakistan and India on the Indus River. They have an agreement. After the agreement, the countries went out they had about 3 all-out war. But the agreement is still working, even during the conflict. So I'm not supporting actually the involvement of the security people in water resources, because the more you politicize and the more you securitize water, the less the role of science will become.
William, let me come back to you. This issue is becoming a domestic political commodity now. It's no more the Nile issue, is no more a foreign affairs issue, at least Ethiopia is concerned. For Egypt, it used to be the same, I think. How do you evaluate the weight of the GERD on local political affairs, its influence on local politics and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think that the domestic political scene and its attitude towards the issue is quite relatively straightforward, because I think to my understanding, there's a very decent degree of consensus there, wide consensus. So most political actors, if not all or almost all political actors, will support the project. They will support Ethiopia's assertion of its rights to develop its own resources and therefore its rights to the Nile. I think we saw with the Washington process and the decision to allow the US and the World Bank to get involved, we saw a moment of political danger for the Prime Minister that was seen as a weak and unwise and perhaps not very well thought out move. It seems like the government has very clearly sort of learnt its lesson since then, and I don't think it will be making any of those sorts of quite rushed concessions to external actors. And that's partly because of this domestic consensus that type of move was wrong, and that Ethiopia must remain resolute on this issue. So actually, we can we can sort of define it quite simply in terms of what the domestic political scene says about it. But I would look at it in the other way you describe, which is what does this mean for the negotiations? And as observers of the process, there is that concern that the domestic conditions in the various countries, they reduce the space for compromise on some of these key issues, and therefore aren't necessarily conducive to getting an agreement.
Fekahmed, on state media in particular, reference had been made to some political groups as foreign agents in relation to this issue. And it's been used before, but for a while it was out of the public sphere, but now it seems the Nile issue is a local political issue.
It's common normally that people can sometimes use, those issues also to boost their political power, within the country. But for me, what is important is really for anybody, for the government to work hard to bring everybody, all political parties around this issue. For that, it is important, when I look at it from outside, it is important really to be accommodative, to allow everybody to play a role, because everybody wants to have a role. When you undertake such big project, it will cost you in terms of resources, in terms of time, in terms of moral, whatever it is. So everybody has to be part of that. Also, everybody really have to benefit from the gains. When I say the gains, there are diplomatic gains, there are political gains, there are social gains. So everybody has to really be part of that. Otherwise, you can see here in the SARE some differences, minor, but the majority of the Ethiopian population is actually behind the construction of the dam. There was some, the morally was a little bit down after what happened in the management of the dam. But the moment the US and the World Bank stand with the bank and they start giving instruction and the prescription to Ethiopian government and the people, so everybody came rushing actually behind the dam. It is a very big support. Yes, it can put the negotiators at a very critical point, because it can narrow the margin of flexibility within which they can really negotiate, but still it will be a very big power behind it gives more power to the Ethiopian negotiating team.
William, Egypt obviously wants to make this a matter of geopolitical issue beyond Ethiopia versus Egypt. And whenever there is this talk of military confrontation between the two states, if it's going to be between the two states, between Ethiopia and Egypt, it's very unlikely we get into such very big, conflict situation. But the Arab League is behind. Some other African countries have vested interest in the issue as well. How do you see the geopolitical relevance of the issue, both for Ethiopia, Egypt, the Sudan, and other neighboring countries in the region?
There's a number of different ways to look at that and answer the question. I think it is a geopolitical issue. So I'm not sure that it's just Egypt making it into one, as much as people would like it to be just a matter of technical negotiation. As I've said a couple of times, this is an Ethiopian assertion of rights, and I think there is a struggle for political influence and control here. I think it's still kind of unfolding, exactly how the international community, what we call the international community, is going to tackle this issue. I think there are some worrying signs that, whilst the US is a strong ally of both Egypt and Ethiopia, it does seem like it's inclined to essentially lend its weight to the Egyptian position. Now, will that have some significant influence at the UN Security Council? Possibly, but the understanding at the moment is that the UNSC does not want this issue to come under its mandate. It wants it to be dealt with between the parties and the region. Other actors, the Gulf countries, I think, the Gulf powers, the Emiratis and the Saudis, I think that's an interesting example of how this might unfold, but also a certain amount of sort of indecision, maybe reticence to get involved from some regional powers. Again, both the Emiratis and Saudis have good relations with both countries, longer and stronger ties with Cairo, although there is some tensions there. But it does seem that because of their relations with the government here and because of their general involvement and interest in the Horn of Africa, they do not want to take a partisan position on this. And I think that goes for quite a lot of other countries as well. So whilst the African Union and Sub-Saharan Africa and upstream Nile states, probably we could say lean towards Ethiopia. At the same time, Egypt is a member of the African Union and it's a major player on the continent. So far they do seem to have been trying to remain relatively neutral. Of course, these kinds of dynamics could shift as the circumstances evolve and the stakes get sort of higher and higher. But at the moment, I would say generally the partners, the third party actors here, they are most interested in the three parties reaching some form of compromise here, because ultimately that will be in everyone's interests. There's certainly no interest there's no more interest for the international actors in conflict than there is for the parties. It would be disastrous for the parties, and it doesn't really suit anyone else's interests either. So I think that's broadly how I see this dynamic.
Fekahmed, the role of Sudan is very critical in this, and Sudan seems to be shifting its alliance. In February, it seems to be on Ethiopian side. Now, it feels like it's on the Egyptian side, and it has also written a letter to the UN Security Council. What's Sudan's interest in this, and why does the Sudanese keep shifting their grounds?
I mean, when we go back to the 2011s, Sudan also had a similar concern like Egypt in 2011 when we started this process, the tripartite process. Then their concern is mainly around dam safety and the environmental and the social impact. But later on, through the process of studies like the IPOE process, later on through the tripartite consultations, Sudan came to understand that they are going to benefit a lot from this dam. They were convinced. They did their own studies, by the way. Sudan did their own studies. And they found out that they are going to get a lot of benefit out of this dam. So this was the position of Sudan up to the change of government. And the Sudanese visited the dam at all levels, and they supported this dam at all levels. They provided, by the way, finance in terms of equipment for the dam. They started even buying bonds. And the Sudanese visited the dam like the head of state, the only head of state outside Ethiopia who visited the dam is the Sudanese president, the former president. So, but they clearly stated that our support is not political. They say it is more related to their national interest, economical. They know that they benefited a lot from the Tekeze Dam. They had similar concern on the Tekeze Dam, but once the Tekeze Dam was completed and started operating, Sudan got huge benefit out of that dam, and they are expecting by far larger benefit from the GERD.
Why did it change now then suddenly?
Suddenly it changed because it is a new government. By the way,
But the new government was against the Arab League's decision to support Egypt, for instance.
Yes, because that decision of the Arab League, I'm sure it should have been drafted by Egyptians, and it was not helpful. That's what they said. It doesn't contribute to anything. But at the same time, you see, all officials who were dealing with this dam since 2011 are no more actually in picture now. All of them are not around. So this is a new team, a new group. Like if you look at the report they sent to the UN Security Council, they are asking for all the process to start afresh. They say we have investigation on the dam safety, on social, environmental, on flow, everything. So they are asking for all the studies to be done again. And it is not fair for Ethiopia to start everything as now. So mainly there is a very big pressure on this new government from Egypt. Also, they want to really get relieved of this, sanction on them. And Egypt is leading, the process of, lifting this sanction. And the U.S. is actually the one who imposed sanction, a new government. So I think this is.
It seems like there is a missed institutional knowledge in this. I mean, whenever a new government comes in, if they require to go through the whole process, it's going to be challenging. William, would you like to add anything on the Sudanese interest in this matter?
Yeah, sure. So I think Sudan's always seen, for a long time now, has seen the potential benefits of GERD. So that's cheap electricity to purchase, reduced flooding downstream because of the regulated flow, potentially increased power generation in Sudan because of the regulated flow, and the same with irrigation potential as well. So these are the potential benefits from the GERD, and these are clearly recognized, including in the letter to the United Nations Security Council. And I think, in Sudan's defense, that was a response to the Egyptian letter. Ethiopia also responded to the Egyptian letter to the UNSC. So it wasn't like Sudan did anything out of the ordinary there. But obviously the GERD is just upstream of Sudan. And there is entirely legitimate concerns about issues like how are, for example, releases from the GERD, how well are they going to be coordinated with downstream reservoirs? I mean, that's a very elementary matter in terms of dam management, but they need to be reassured of these things. Any concerns about, if there was any structural issues with the dam, I'm not saying there is, but that would obviously be of massive concern for Sudan. So I think they have some legitimate concerns as well, where they want reassurance. There's also a political element to this, but I would maybe see it more in terms of, again, Sudan perhaps acting more autonomously, or actors within the Sudanese scene acting more autonomously, maybe stressing, yes, potential benefits, but also they want reassuring on the risks. And then there is the more political element. There's various transitional actors in Sudan. So the Sudanese military, generally more aligned with the Cairo security establishment, and perhaps pursuing a rather harder line, putting more pressure on Ethiopia. That also relates to the recent flare-up with regards to the disputed Sudanese-Ethiopian border areas. Other actors, Prime Minister Hamdok, he seems more aligned with Ethiopia. Yes, perhaps he's representing an assertion of interests over studies, over dam safety issues, but generally more aligned with Ethiopia and playing that kind of middle role which Sudan has played throughout, because we've also talked about how Sudan worked hard, and Prime Minister Hamdok worked hard to get the parties back to the negotiating table. So I would see it as a rather of a mixed picture. And yes, the state sponsor of terrorism designation and the relations with Washington are important for Sudan. They're in dire economic straits. They need to get that removed. Therefore, it does make sense not to do anything to upset Washington at this time. These factors are definitely there, but I would also see some autonomous and legitimate concerns from Sudan as well.
Perfect. We are approaching an end. Fekahmed, maybe a last question. You've been saying Egypt needs to adopt its water resource policy to the new reality. Ethiopia is a big country with more than 100 million people, and it's a landlocked and water-scarce country, unlike Egypt. But on the other hand, you claim that Egypt has enough water resource that can serve generations for 1,000 years. What advice would you give to our Egyptian brothers in relation to this?
You see, on the 4th BC, this Greek philosopher Herodotus, he stated that Egypt is a gift of the Nile. Yes, it was true at that time, but still it is existing in the mind of all Egyptians. Egypt is no more the gift of the Nile, because you can look at the contribution of, for example, agriculture to the Egyptian GDP. It is only 14%, 14%. Look at the contribution of water to the Egyptian power or energy mix, it is only 6%. So at that time, yes, Egypt was totally dependent on the Nile, not only the water, but also the fertile soil coming down from Ethiopian highland. But now the fertile soil is no more reaching there. It is being, kept in the Nile Dam. So it is only the water. My advice actually is, one, really to understand the current situation because the population is increasing, economy is growing. With that, water demand is increasing. And also, like countries like Ethiopia used to feed, their population based on rain-fed agriculture, which was very reliable. But now it is no more reliable because there is climate change. There is high variability of rainfall in time and the space. So rainfall agriculture is no more, reliable investment to feed the Ethiopian population. This is not only for Ethiopia, but for all upstream countries. And there is huge need for energy in all upstream countries. So, one shouldn't consider this transboundary river as own resource. It belongs to all the basin countries. So that thinking has to come into the mind of Egyptian officials. This is a resource that should be fairly shared by all countries, that should be managed cooperatively, that should be owned by all, one. Second, it should not be considered as issue of national security. Egyptians can consider anything as an issue of their national security. But you consider something that is not under your control as an issue of your national security, that means your national security is very vulnerable. Also, they should really remove this issue also from the constitution. Look at the Egyptian constitution, Article 44. It talks about Egyptian government protecting the historical rights they have on the Nile, protecting as well as maintaining the historical right. This doesn't give Egyptian officials any room for negotiation, no room for negotiation.
I think it's a very fair point to finish. William, would you like to add anything? If not, time is not in our favor. We are coming to an end, but you can say.
Very, very, very quickly, maybe. I think this debate has a lot of historical resonance, but I think the more perhaps that we focus on that, the harder it is to start making progress. So I do favour an approach which tries to sort of de-escalate the debate, let's say. So we focus on these technical issues, get some sort of agreement on the GERD. Perhaps that will help Egypt realize that upstream developments are not a threat to Egyptian livelihoods. Therefore, maybe that will lead to an improved mindset. It will formalize cooperation between the parties, increase trust, lead to a new Egyptian mindset, hopefully. And then we can move on to addressing the issues of the cooperative framework agreement, the issue of historical rights ultimately. But I think the best approach is to try and embrace compromise and consensus on these issues relating to the GERD and then progressively move onwards from there.
Thank you so much. This is obviously a regularly developing story and we shall follow the updates. Thank you for watching and thank you for your contribution. William Davison, Senior Ethiopian Analyst at the Crisis Group and Founding Editor of Ethiopia Insight. Fekahmed Negash, Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office Executive Director. Next time, we'll be back with another topic and another guest. Until then, goodbye from me, Benya Smeso, and the team at Addis Matters.